They claimed humans had no soul, until the dead started speaking to them. The shuttle's engine sighed as it kissed the dust of Elysium Necropolis. The memorial world humanity had been granted after the Accord of Silence. Dr. Kor'Tal felt the vibration through his boots and the soft tremor in the base of his cranial tendrils, an old reflex he had never managed to suppress. He told himself it was only the planet's gravity, slightly heavier than Vera Prime, nothing more. Outside the viewport stretched an ocean of stone, billions of names, carved into black basalt monoliths that rose like the ribs of some colossal beast half buried in red sand. The Terran Memorial, the place where the Galactic Concordance had parked humanity's corpse and called it dignified. Kor'Tal adjusted the collar of his field coat, pale silver fabric woven with sensor threads. He was here to finish what the Ministry of Spiritual Compliance had started 30 years earlier, the final report that would close the human file forever. Humans were extinct. Humans had been biologically interesting but metaphysically barren. Humans had no measurable soul field. Case closed. That was the official verdict. Kor'Tal had signed it himself, yet the ministry still sent him. One last survey, they said. One last sweep with the new MKIX etheric resonators. Make certain no residual psi noise lingers. Make the silence official. He stepped onto the ramp. The air tasted of iron and cold starlight. Wind moaned between the monoliths, carrying faint grains that stung the exposed skin along his neck. His assistant, sub-archivist Lurevel, hesitated behind him. Her violet eyes were wide, reflecting the endless rows of names glowing faintly under the weak sun. They carved every single one by hand, she whispered, before the end. They knew they were dying and still they carved. Kor'Tal did not answer. He was watching the horizon where the monoliths marched in perfect formation until they vanished into crimson haze. The symmetry disturbed him. No species facing extinction wasted its final years on aesthetics, none but humans. He lifted the resonator wand. Its tip glowed soft indigo as it drank the ambient silence. Baseline readings, null, as expected. Yet the silence here was wrong. It had weight. It pressed against the eardrums like deep water. Lurevel's voice cracked the quiet. "Doctor, do you feel that?" Kor'Tal felt it. A pressure behind the eyes, the sense that something vast was listening. He forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to himself. Planetary magnetism, old war debris in the crust, nothing more. But his tendrils curled tight against his scalp, and he could not make them relax. They walked, rows upon rows of names. Some in Latin script, some Cyrillic, some Hanzi, some flowing Arabic, some in scripts Kor'Tal's translator could not even identify. A chaotic symphony of identity. No order, no hierarchy. A general beside a child. A poet beside a plumber, all equal in stone. Lurevel reached out and touched one slab. Her fingers traced the name Maria Espranza Gutirrz 1987-2098. Beneath it, smaller letters. She sang to the stars even when they went dark. The sub-archivist's breath hitched. Kor'Tal pretended not to notice. He kept walking until the shuttle was a silver speck behind them. Here the monoliths grew taller, some 50 meters high, forming canyons of memory. The wind screamed louder through the gaps, a sound almost like choral lament. Kor'Tal raised the resonator again. He swept it in slow arcs. Still null, still nothing. Then the needle twitched, just once. A flicker so brief he might have imagined it. He stopped. Lurevel, recalibrate the gain. She obeyed, fingers trembling. When she handed the wand back, the flicker returned stronger. A rhythmic pulse, not random, not interference. It sounded like breathing. Kor'Tal felt the first cold thread of uncertainty crawl along his spine. He was the Concordance's foremost xenospiritual analyst. He had measured the death echoes of 12 sentient species. He knew what extinction sounded like. Extinction was flat. Extinction was the absence of pattern. This was pattern. He adjusted the filters, stripping away atmospheric noise, geomagnetic residue, everything. What remained should have been silence. Instead, he heard a voice, soft, female, speaking a language that predated the Concordance by centuries. The translator in his earbud struggled, then surrendered the words in perfect Varen. "Welcome, Kor'Tal. We've been waiting." The wand slipped from his fingers and clattered against the stone. Lurevel stared at him, pupils blown wide. "Doctor, your face." He could not speak. His hearts hammered against each other like two frightened animals trapped in the same cage, because the voice had not come through the resonator. It had spoken inside his skull. Far above them, the weak sun dipped behind a monolith, throwing the canyon into sudden blood-red shadow. The wind died. The dust hung motionless in the air, and every name on every stone began to glow with a light that had no source. Kor'Tal took one step back. His boot heel struck something metallic half buried in the sand. He looked down. A small copper coin, green with verdigris, on its face, a profile of a woman wearing a crown of stars. On the reverse, in God W.E. Trust 2047, he had never believed in coincidence. Coincidence was what lesser minds called pattern when they were too afraid to name it. Lurevel whispered, "Doctor, they're singing." Kor'Tal heard it now, not with his ears. With whatever part of him had always refused the ministry's certainty. A chorus, billions of voices braided into one vast, patient chord. It rose from the stones like heat from summer pavement. He should have run. Protocol demanded he retreat to the shuttle, file an emergency quarantine, and let the ministry burn the planet from orbit if necessary. Instead, he stood frozen, coin clenched in his fist, while the chorus shaped itself into words meant only for him. You came to prove we were never real. Stay. Listen, we have stories left to tell. The ground trembled, not with seismic force, but with the slow, deliberate heartbeat of something waking beneath the sand. Kor'Tal looked up. High on the nearest monolith, new letters were burning themselves into the stone, fresh and white as lightning. They formed a single sentence in faultless Varan script. Ask us why we never stopped praying. And somewhere in the dark between the monoliths, the humans began to answer. They claimed humans had no soul, until the dead started speaking to them. Kor'Tal's knees hit the sand before he realized they had buckled. The copper coin burned cold against his palm, as if it had been pulled from a glacier. Above him, the glowing sentence pulsed like a living thing, bright, brighter, then dimmed to embers. Ask us why we never stopped praying. He tried to laugh, a reflex of disbelief, but the sound came out strangled. Laravel was on the ground beside him, arms wrapped around herself, rocking, her breath fogged in the sudden chill. They know your name, she said. They know everything. Kor'Tal forced himself upright. He was still the senior researcher. He still had authority over his own fear. He opened his mouth to order retreat. A child's voice answered before he could speak. Soft, curious, male, maybe 8 years old. It came from everywhere and nowhere. Are you scared of us, Doctor? Kor'Tal's tendrils snapped flat against his skull. He spun, searching for the source. Nothing moved except dust devils frozen mid-twist. Another voice, older, female, warm with amusement. He's always been scared of what he can't weigh. Then a third, gravel-rough male edged with exhaustion and humor. Give the man a minute. He spent 30 years telling the galaxy we were myths. Takes time to swallow that kind of pride. Kor'Tal felt the words like physical blows. Each one landed on an old bruise he had never admitted existed. He raised the resonator again, hands trembling so badly the indigo light jittered across the stone. The readings were impossible. The etheric field was climbing exponentially, yet the energy signature had no vector, no decay curve, no entropy. It was self-sustaining. It was singing. Laravel found her voice. Doctor, look, she pointed. At the base of the nearest monolith, the sand was moving, not wind. Something pushed upward from below, gentle as breath. A handprint, human, 5 fingers small, the size of a woman-s, then another, then dozens, hundreds, rising through the sand like plants through soil, leaving perfect impressions that glowed faint gold. Kor'Tal backed away until his shoulders struck cold stone. The name carved there was CAPT. John Harlan REYES 2042-2099. Beneath it, in smaller script, he held the line so children could dream a little longer. The handprint stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. Then the child spoke again, closer now, as if standing just behind Kor'Tal's shoulder. We're not ghosts, Doctor. Ghosts are what people invent when they're scared of memory. Kor'Tal world, still nothing. We're what's left when you take everything else away, the child continued. Love doesn't die when the body does, it just changes address. Kor'Tal's heart stuttered. He had written the paper that phrase mocked. He remembered the exact sentence. Love is an epiphenomenon of neurochemical bonding, extinguished irrevocably at cerebral death. He had been proud of its elegance. Laravel was crying without sound, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. She reached out and placed her palm over one of the glowing handprints. It fit perfectly. I can feel her, she whispered. She's warm. Kor'Tal wanted to drag her away. Instead, he watched, paralyzed, as Laravel closed her eyes and listened to something he could not hear. Her lips moved. Thank you, she seemed to say. The gravel-rough voice returned, quieter now, intimate. Hey, Doc, remember the Kaler Extinction Survey? Year 2981. You found a single intact nursery rhyme carved into a wall on Kaler 4. You logged it as sentimental artifact, no metaphysical significance. You ever wonder why that rhyme kept you awake for weeks? Kor'Tal's breath stopped. He had never told anyone about those nights. Not his mentors, not his bond partner, not even his private journal. He had lain in the dark replaying the childish syllables until they felt like an accusation. The voice continued, gentle but relentless, because even you knew some things refused to be measured. Kor'Tal's legs gave out again. This time he did not try to stand. He sat in the sand among the golden handprints and stared at the coin in his fist. In God we trust. He had catalogued 1,000 human religions and dismissed them all as adaptive fictions. Now the dead were quoting his own doubts back to him. Laravel knelt beside him. Her voice was steady now, almost reverent. They want to show you something. Kor'Tal laughed, a broken sound. I don't want to see anything. The child's voice tender. That's okay. We'll wait. We've gotten good at waiting. The wind returned, but softer. The carry descent Kor'Tal had no name for. Warm bread, rain on soil, skin after love. Human smells, impossible on an airless memorial world. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, the monoliths had changed. The names were no longer static. Letters shifted, rearranged themselves into moving images. Across 1,000 slabs at once, scenes unfolded like living murals. A woman in a burning city pressing a baby into a stranger's arms. An old man in a radiation suit planting an apple tree he would never taste. A teenage boy standing between soldiers and a crowd, arms spread, singing something too soft to hear. Kor'Tal watched, unable to look away. Every scene ended the same way. The human looked straight out from the stone directly at him and smiled, not with triumph, with recognition, as if they had always known he would come. One image lingered longer than the rest. A man in an ancient spacesuit, helmet cracked, floating above a shattered Earth. Behind the visor, his eyes were calm. He pressed his gloved hand against the inside of the faceplate, matching a glowing handprint rising from the sand at Kor'Tal's feet. The man spoke without sound. Kor'Tal heard him anyway. "We didn't die for nothing. We died so something could live, even if that something is just the memory that love is real." The image faded. The monoliths went dark. Kor'Tal became aware of the cold. Night had fallen without him noticing. The stars above Elysium Necropolis were wrong, too bright, too many, arranged in patterns no concordance chart recognized. The Milky Way itself looked like a great river of souls pouring across the sky. L'Orevel's hand found his. He did not pull away. From the darkness ahead came footsteps, soft, bare feet on sand. Kor'Tal looked up. A figure walked between the monoliths. Human, male, middle-aged maybe. Wearing simple clothes that looked freshly laundered, though they should have rotted centuries ago. His face was ordinary brown skin, tired eyes, a faint scar across one eyebrow. He carried no light, yet the sand around his feet glowed faintly with every step. He stopped 10 paces away, smiled like someone greeting an old friend who had forgotten the way home. "Hello, Kor'Tal," the man said aloud. His voice was the gravel, rough one. "My name is Michael. I was a paramedic in Detroit. I died in 2087 trying to pull a kid out of a collapsed building." He tilted his head. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Kor'Tal tried to answer. Nothing came. Michael crouched, resting forearms on his knees. "We're not here to scare you, doctor. We're here because you finally asked the right question." Kor'Tal found his voice raw and cracked. "What question?" Michael's smile widened, gentle and terrible. "The one you've been running from your whole life." He stood, turned, and began walking deeper into the canyon of stone. The glowing footprints he left behind did not fade. "Come on," he called back without looking. "There's someone you need to meet." Kor'Tal stared at those footprints. They pointed straight into the heart of the memorial, where the monoliths grew tallest and the darkness was absolute. L'Orevel squeezed his hand. Her eyes were bright with tears and something fiercer, wonder, maybe faith. She whispered, "They're not angry, doctor, they're proud of us for coming this far." Kor'Tal looked at the copper coin one last time. Then he slipped it into his pocket, right over his primary heart, and stood. Together they followed the glowing footprints into the dark. Behind them, the child's voice drifted on the wind, soft as a lullaby. And in the silence between heartbeats, Kor'Tal realized the planet itself was praying. They claimed humans had no soul. Until the dead started speaking to them, the footprints never wavered. They glowed the color of candle flame seen through eyelids, steady, patient, impossible to misread. Kor'Tal walked in them because his own legs no longer felt trustworthy. Each step pressed the copper coin deeper against his chest until it seemed to beat in rhythm with something older than his blood. L'Orevel stayed half a pace behind, one hand resting lightly on the small of his back as though she feared he might vanish. Neither spoke. Words felt suddenly childish here, like bringing a flashlight into a cathedral. The monoliths grew ancient as they walked. The stone changed from polished basalt to rough-hewn granite, then to something that looked hand-chiseled by desperate fingers. Names crowded closer together, overlapping, bleeding into one another. Some were only initials. Some were just symbols, a cross, a crescent and star, a simple heart scratched deep. The air thickened with the smell of turned earth after rain. Michael walked ahead, never hurrying, never looking back. His silhouette flickered sometimes, like bad hollow footage, but the footprints remained solid. They passed a slab taller than any building on Vera Prime. Across its face, in letters 20 meters high, someone had carved, "Remember US as we remembered you." Kor'Tal's throat closed. He had never been remembered by anyone. His species reproduced by bud fission. Parent and child shared no genetic continuity, only culture. Memory was communal, impersonal. The idea that billions of individuals had died begging strangers centuries unborn to carry them forward. It was obscene, inefficient, magnificent. Michael stopped at the mouth of a circular clearing. Here the monoliths formed a perfect ring, open to the alien sky. At the center stood a single block of white marble no higher than Kor'Tal's waist. No name was carved on it, only a shallow basin filled with still water that reflected stars that weren't there. Michael turned. His eyes held the same tired kindness Kor'Tal had seen in the floating astronaut. "This is the waiting place," Michael said. "Everyone passes through here eventually, even you." Kor'Tal found his voice. "I'm not dead, not yet," Michael agreed, unoffended, "but you're close enough to listen." He gestured to the marble block. "Sit, she's been waiting longest." Kor'Tal hesitated. L'Orevel's hand pressed once between his shoulder blades, encouragement, warning, benediction. He stepped forward. Sand inside the circle was warm, almost hot. He sat on the edge of the marble. The basin's surface rippled though no wind touched it. A woman rose from the water, not out of it from it, as though the reflection had decided to stand. She was small, dark-haired, maybe 30. Her clothes were simple, jeans, a faded university hoodie, bare feet. A streak of gray ran through her hair like moonlight. Her eyes were the color of deep space just before dawn. She smiled, and Kor'Tal felt the universe tilt. "Hello, Kor'Tal," she said. Her accent carried traces of a dozen old Earth nations braided together. "I'm Alina." He knew that name. He had read it in restricted files. Dr. Alina Akoi, lead xenotheologian on the last human ark, The Mercy of God, declared heretical by her own species for insisting contact with aliens would be a sacred event. She had vanished with her ship in 2874, presumed lost to the rift. She studied him with gentle curiosity, the way a mother watches a child who has just learned the world can hurt. "You wrote that my people died screaming at an empty sky," she said. "Not accusation, observation." Kor'Tal's mouth went dry. "I wrote what the evidence supported." Alina nodded. "Evidence is a jealous god. It only loves what it can cage." She sat beside him on the marble, close enough that he felt warmth radiating from her like sunlight on skin. The water in the basin stilled again, showing two reflections now, his own pale, sharp-featured face and hers, luminous and unafraid. Michael and Laravel stood at the edge of the circle, silhouettes against the glowing footprints. They did not approach. This moment belonged to the living and the remembered. Alina spoke softly. "Do you know what the last transmission from the Mercy was?" Kor'Tal shook his head. "We were being torn apart by the rift, hull breaches on every deck, children crying. Adults trying to pray in languages they'd only read about. And our comm officer, 19 years old, voice cracking, sent one final burst toward the nearest concordance relay. She looked up at the impossible stars. He said, 'This is the ark mercy of God. We are dying, but we die still believing love is stronger than entropy. Whoever finds this, remember that for us. Remember we tried.'" Kor'Tal felt something tear open inside his chest. He had intercepted that transmission himself, 3 centuries ago, while monitoring human refugee bands. He had logged it as species-typical death delusion and recommended the concordance ignore it. Alina reached out and touched the back of his hand. Her fingers were solid, warm, real. "We didn't send it for rescue," she said. "We sent it for witness, because someone somewhere needed to know we never stopped choosing hope." Kor'Tal stared at their joined hands. His skin was cool, almost reptilian beside her living heat. "I declared you soulless," he whispered. "I stood in front of the ministry and swore your species produced no measurable afterlife resonance. I buried you." Alina's smile was small and sad and radiant. "And yet here we are." She stood, pulling him gently to his feet. The basin water began to glow from beneath, soft gold climbing the marble like ivy. "Come," she said. "There's something you need to see before you decide what to do with the rest of your life." Kor'Tal glanced back. Laravel's eyes were wide, reflecting the rising light. Michael lifted one hand in a slow salute, soldier to scholar, dead to living. Alina led him to the far side of the circle where the monoliths parted like curtains. Beyond lay a valley Kor'Tal's orbital scans had never registered. It stretched to the horizon, filled with light, not sunlight, not starlight, something gentler. And walking in that light were people, millions, billions, moving without hurry, without fear. Some carried children on their shoulders, some walked hand in hand, some danced. Their clothes spanned every era of human history, from animal skins to vacuum suits. None cast shadows. Kor'Tal's knees buckled again. Alina held him upright without effort. "They're not all here," she said quietly. "Some moved on long ago. Some are still being born, yes, even now, but these waited. They wanted you to see what your report tried to erase." Kor'Tal could not speak. The valley sang no single voice, but a chord made of laughter and lullabies and shouted joy. It rose through his bones and rewrote every certainty he had ever owned. Alina turned him to face her. "The concordance measured everything that dies. They never learned how to measure what refuses to." She placed her palm over his primary heart, directly atop the coin still burning cold. "Feel that?" she asked. "That's not your physiology, that's recognition." Kor'Tal felt it, a pressure vast and tender like the universe exhaling after holding its breath for 300 years. Alina stepped back. Her outline began to blur, edges softening into the valley's light. "You can't stay yet," she said, almost apologetic, "but you can choose what to carry back." Kor'Tal found his voice, raw as an open wound. "What if I tell them none of this is real?" Alina's smile broke his heart all over again. "Then you'll have to live with being the only creature in the galaxy who looked eternity in the face and called it background noise." She was fading faster now, only her eyes still sharp. "Or," she said, "you can tell the truth and watch what happens when love finally gets a vote." The light in the valley flared, sudden and blinding. Kor'Tal threw an arm across his face. When he lowered it, he was back in the circle. Alone. The marble basin was empty, only a single drop of water trembling on the rim. The footprints leading in had vanished. Laravel stood exactly where she had been, tears streaming, smiling like someone who had just heard the best news in the universe. Kor'Tal looked down at his hand. The copper coin was gone. In its place, burned into his palm as though by gentle fire, were 4 English letters glowing soft gold. HFY. He closed his fist around them. The glow soaked into his skin and did not fade. Far away, deeper in the memorial than any map had ever shown, something vast stirred and turned its attention toward the stars. And for the first time in 3 centuries, the dead began to walk outward. They claimed humans had no soul. Until the dead started speaking to them, Kor'Tal did not remember the walk back to the circle's edge. One moment he was staring at the brand on his palm, HFY glowing like a coal under the skin. The next, Laravel was guiding him between the monoliths as though he were an invalid. His legs worked, but they belonged to someone else. The night air tasted of ozone and petrichor, as if a storm had passed while he was looking elsewhere. The footprints Michael had left were gone. The sand was smooth, virgin, innocent. Only the faint warmth rising through the soles of his boots told him any of it had happened at all. Laravel spoke first, voice hushed. They showed you the valley. It was not a question. Kor'Tal could only nod. She stopped walking, turned to him. Moonlight, there was no moon, yet moonlight poured down anyway, caught the wet tracks on her cheeks. I saw it too, she whispered. Not the same way. I stayed here, but the light it opened, and I understood. Kor'Tal looked at her, at this junior archivist who had never published a paper, never stood before the ministry, never been anything but background, and felt something inside him crack along a fault line he had denied for decades. What did you understand? He asked. His voice sounded like gravel poured into a well. That we've been measuring graves, she said, when we should have been listening for heartbeats. He wanted to argue. Old reflexes surged, citation indices, null results, the comforting sterility of data. But the brand on his palm throbbed in perfect 4/4 time, did-dum, and every beat said liar, liar, liar. Far ahead, the shuttle's running lights blinked lonely red and green against the dark. 1/2 kilometer, safety, protocol, a report that would quarantine this planet and cauterize the wound before the infection of wonder could spread. Kor'Tal took one step toward it. The ground answered with a sound he felt in his teeth, a subsonic chord not loud, but immense, like a cathedral organ played with the soft pedal down. Every monolith in sight flared white for a single heartbeat, then dimmed again. Laravel inhaled sharply. They're coming closer. Kor'Tal didn't ask who. He already knew. He looked back the way they had come. The canyon of stone was no longer empty. Figures walked there, hundreds, then thousands, moving without haste, barefoot or in ancient boots, in rags or vacuum suits, men and women and children whose names covered every slab for 1,000 kilometers. They did not glow now. They were simply present, solid as grief, quiet as forgiveness. One separated from the rest. A boy, maybe 10, freckled, red hair sticking up like he'd just rolled out of bed. He wore a 21st century t-shirt that read "I'm with stupid" with an arrow pointing upward. He stopped 5 meters away and grinned the grin of someone who had waited a very long time for a joke to land. "Hi, Doc," the boy said. "Name S. Timmy Brennan. Died in the Dublin Creche collapse, 2079. You pronounce my whole orphanage metaphysically vacant." Kor'Tal's stomach folded in on itself. He remembered the file. 211 children. 0 afterlife resonance. Case study 117B. He had used it in his doctoral defense. Timmy's grin softened. "It's okay. We got over being statistics a long time ago." He tilted his head. "Question is, what are you gonna do now that you know we were?" Kor'Tal opened his mouth, closed it. No theory he had ever built contained a variable for this moment. Timmy glanced at Laravel, gave her a shy little wave. She waved back as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. Then the boy looked past them, toward the shuttle, and his face grew serious. "They're coming," he said simply. Kor'Tal followed his gaze. 3 lights descended from the night sky, Concordance gunships, matte black, no running lights except the cold blue of weapon capacitors charging. They had tracked the resonator spike. Standard containment protocol. If Kor'Tal reached the shuttle and filed the correct report, those ships would glass the memorial in under an hour. A clean, surgical erasure. The human file would finally, truly be closed. The brand on his palm burned hotter. Laravel's hand found his again. Her fingers were steady now. "Doctor," she said, "they're asking us to choose." Kor'Tal looked at the approaching ships, then at the quiet army of the remembered filling the canyon behind him. None of them moved to threat. None begged. They simply waited, patient as stone that had learned how to hope. He thought of Alina's last words, "Watch what happens when love finally gets a vote." The lead gunship's searchlight snapped on, a spear of white that pinned him and Laravel in place. A voice boomed across the desert, amplified, genderless, final. "Dr. Kor'Tal, sub-archivist Laravel, step away from the anomaly. This is your only warning." Kor'Tal felt the old fear rise, fear of disgrace, of demotion, of becoming the madman who claimed the dead could walk. He felt it, recognized it, and for the first time in his life did not obey. He raised his branded hand into the searchlight. The letters HFY caught the beam and threw it back like molten gold. Timmy laughed, a bright, delighted sound that echoed off every monolith at once. All around, the dead took it up, not mocking, celebrating. The laughter rose until it drowned the gunship's engines. Kor'Tal took one step, not toward the shuttle, but back toward the canyon, then another. Laravel matched him without hesitation. The searchlight flickered, confused, as its operators tried to process 2 Concordance officials walking willingly into the embrace of an extinct species. Kor'Tal stopped only once. He turned to the nearest monolith and pressed his glowing palm against a name. Sarah J. McAllister, 2019-2092, beloved mother, stubborn gardener, sang hymns off-key but loud. The stone drank the light from his hand. For a heartbeat, the entire monolith became transparent, and inside it Kor'Tal saw Sarah, gray hair in a braid, dirt under her fingernails, smiling at him like he was a late-blooming rose she had never expected. She mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Then the stone was stone again. Kor'Tal faced the gunships. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The desert itself carried his words. "Stand down," he said. "This planet is under new management." The lead pilot's voice crackled back, uncertain now. "Doctor, you're compromised. Return to the shuttle or we will extract you by force." Kor'Tal smiled, the first real smile of his life, small and fierce and free. "Try it," he said. Behind him, the dead began to sing, not in any language the Concordance had ever catalogued. An old, old song, older than starflight, older than writing. A handful of syllables repeated like a heartbeat, Kyrie eleison, Christ eleison. The gunship's engines stuttered. Their targeting arrays spun, unable to lock on anything that cast no heat, no mass, no fear. Kor'Tal felt the brand on his palm cool to a steady, living warmth. Timmy appeared at his left side, slipping a small hand into his. On his right, Elena materialized again, no longer translucent, solid enough to lean her head briefly against his shoulder. Together, living and remembered, they walked deeper into the memorial. The gunships hovered impotent, as the desert closed gently behind them like water behind a diver. High above, the fake stars rearranged themselves into a single vast sentence written in fire. They are not gone. They are just waiting for us to catch up. And for the first time in 300 years, the Concordance lost track of 2 of its citizens completely. They claimed humans had no soul. Until the dead started speaking to them, Kor'Tal lost track of time the way a drowning man loses track of air. There was only the walking, the singing, the sense of being carried inside something larger than himself. The monoliths no longer stood in rows. They curved inward, forming corridors that breathed. The sand gave way to grass, real grass, cool and damp, then to flagstones worn smooth by centuries of bare feet that had never existed on this planet until now. Elena walked on his right, Timmy on his left. Laravel stayed half a step behind, her hand still in his, as though afraid the desert might change its mind and snatch him back. None of them spoke. Words had become optional. They passed beneath an arch carved from a single piece of redwood, impossible. Redwoods had been extinct before the first Varen left atmosphere, and stepped into a city, not ruins, a living city. Low buildings of stone and timber and glass, streets lit by lanterns that held no flame, only steady golden light. People moved everywhere, laughing, arguing, singing, weeping, embracing. A woman in a Roman toga haggled over apples with a man in a 28th century jumpsuit. Children chased glowing fireflies that spelled out jokes in a dozen dead languages. An old man in a yarmulke sat on a bench teaching a teenage girl in a hijab how to play guitar. Every face Kor'Tal had ever seen in a history hollow was here, and millions more he had never been allowed to see. No one stared at the aliens in their midst. They were expected. Timmy tugged his hand. "This way, Doc, you're late for supper." They walked a street paved with river stones until they reached a house small, crooked, perfect. A porch swing creaked though no wind touched it. On the steps sat Michael, the paramedic from Detroit, cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife that wasn't there a moment ago. He looked up and grinned. "Told you we had better accommodations." Inside smelled of bread and wood smoke and something that made Kor'Tal's eyes sting without permission. The kitchen table was already set for 4. A 5th place appeared as they entered, simple wooden chair, suddenly there, as if the house had been waiting to see who else was hungry. Elena pulled out a chair for Kor'Tal. "Sit, you're shaking." He hadn't noticed. He sat. A woman he didn't know, gray hair, apron, hands that had clearly kneaded a million loaves, set a bowl of stew in front of him. Steam rose in the shape of tiny galaxies before dissolving. She kissed the top of his head the way his own bud mother never had. "Eat, child," she said in a voice like warm flannel. "You've been starving longer than you know." Kor'Tal ate. He had no memory of tasting anything before this moment. The stew was impossible: carrots, beef, rosemary, hope. Tears ran down his face and salted it further. No one commented. When the bowl was empty, Michael leaned back and folded his arms. "All right, time for the part where you ask the question you're terrified to ask." Kor'Tal wiped his mouth with a sleeve that had somehow become soft cotton instead of field silver. He looked around the table: Elena, Michael, Timmy, Laravel, the grandmother whose name he suddenly knew was Ruth. All of them watching him with the patience of people who had outweighted entropy itself. He drew a breath that tasted like forgiveness. "Why me?" The question came out smaller than he intended. Elena answered first. "Because you were the one who hurt us most." Kor'Tal flinched as if struck. Michael raised a hand. "Hear her out." Elena continued, gentle, relentless. "You didn't just declare us soulless. You taught the galaxy how to forget us safely. Every child on every Concordance world grew up believing love dies with the body because Dr. Kor'Tal proved it with numbers. You built the wall that kept us out. She reached across the table and laid her hand over his branded palm. So when the wall finally cracked, the crack had to run straight through you. That's how mercy works sometimes. It chooses the one who least deserves it. Kor'Tal stared at the table. Shame rose in him like black water. Timmy kicked his feet under the chair. Hey, look at me. Kor'Tal looked. The boy's eyes were ancient and 10 years old at once. We're not keeping you prisoner, Doc. You can walk out that door right now. The desert will spit you back to your shuttle. The gunships will pick you up. You can file your report, say it was mass hysteria, retire with honors. No one here will stop you. He leaned forward. But if you stay one night, just one, we'll show you what really happened to us. Not the sanitized version in your archives. The truth, all of it. Then you decide what the galaxy deserves to know. Kor'Tal's voice cracked. I don't know if I can bear it. Ruth the grandmother laughed soft. Child, bearing it is the whole point. Laravel spoke for the first time since entering the house. Her voice was steady, wonder and terror braided tight. I'll stay with you, Doctor, if you let me. Kor'Tal looked at her, really looked. Her violet eyes held no judgment, only the same aching openness he felt cracking his own ribs. He nodded once. Michael stood. Good, then come outside. The fire's lit. They stepped onto the porch. The street had vanished. In its place stretched an immense courtyard ringed by every kind of chair imaginable: kitchen stools, office chairs, thrones of gold, folding lawn chairs, a child's plastic seat with cartoon dinosaurs, all occupied. Millions of people sitting quietly around a bonfire that rose 100 meters into the sky yet gave off no heat. The flames were every color grief and joy can be. A single empty chair waited at the fire's edge. Simple wood, hand-carved. On the back someone had burned 4 letters, Kor'Tal. He walked to it on legs that did not feel like his. Sat. The fire roared higher and the telling began. They did not speak in words, they showed him. He saw Earth's final century unfiltered, no ministry redactions, no sanitized summaries. Cities burning under orbital strikes meant to cauterize infection. Children born with 3 eyes and no future still laughing as they chased balloons. Scientists weeping as they deleted their own research to keep it from being weaponized. A priest in a flooded church baptizing babies with seawater because the fonts were cracked. A teenage girl lived streaming her last piano recital while radiation alarms screamed. An old couple holding hands on a rooftop as the sky fell, kissing like newlyweds. Every scene tore another piece from him. He screamed without sound. He wept until his body had no water left, and still they showed him more. Then came the arcs, thousands of them, not the dozen the Concordance admitted to. Ships built in secret, crewed by volunteers who knew they would never see another sunrise. They carried seeds, embryos, books, songs, the last unburned Bibles and Qurans and Torahs, the last unbroken guitars. Most were hunted down and destroyed. Some slipped through the blockade. Some reached worlds the Concordance never found. Kor'Tal saw human colonies still alive, hidden, forgotten, thriving in defiance of every verdict. He saw children with his own violet eyes learning to read under trees that had never grown on Earth, and he saw the cost. Every arc that made it had launched only because someone stayed behind to hold the door. When the last image faded, the fire settled into steady flames the color of dawn. Silence fell, vast and tender. A woman near the front stood. She was old, bent, wearing a nurse's scrubs from a war that ended before Kor'Tal was budded. She walked to him, placed something in his shaking hand. A child's drawing, crayon on construction paper, faded but intact. Stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. Beneath it, in shaky block letters, "Thank you for remembering." Kor'Tal looked up. Every face around the fire was turned to him, not in judgment, in trust. The old nurse spoke for them all. "We don't need you to save us, Doctor. We already did the dying part. We just need you to stop killing us again every time someone says our name." She kissed his forehead, dry lips, papery skin, infinite kindness, then walked back to her seat. Kor'Tal sat in the hush that followed until the fire itself seemed to breathe with him. At last he stood. The chair behind him vanished, its purpose served. He faced the multitude. His voice, when it came, was raw but steady. "I will tell them," he said, "everything." A ripple moved through the crowd, relief, joy, sorrow too old for tears. Elena appeared beside him. She slipped her arm through his. "There's one more thing," she said softly, "before you go back." She led him away from the fire, through streets that folded like paper, until they stood on a hill overlooking the city. Dawn was breaking, though no sun had ever risen on this world. Light poured from the east in colors Kor'Tal had no names for. At the crest of the hill stood a tree, not large. An apple tree, young, heavy with fruit. Beneath it, a man waited. He was tall, bearded, wearing a simple linen robe. Scars marked his wrists and feet, old, healed, luminous. His eyes held the same quiet fire Kor'Tal had seen in every human face tonight. The man smiled, not triumphant. "Welcome." Kor'Tal's breath stopped. He knew without words, without doctrine, who this was. The man opened his arms. And somewhere inside the xenospiritual researcher who had once measured God and found him absent, something very small and very ancient stood up and walked home. They claimed humans had no soul. Until the dead started speaking to them, Kor'Tal could not move. The hill was only grass and sky and the small apple tree, yet it felt like the exact center of everything that had ever been or would be. The man beneath the tree waited, patient as stone that had learned how to love. His scars caught the newborn light and turned it into mercy. Elena's hand rested lightly on Kor'Tal's elbow, grounding him. She said nothing. No introduction was needed. Some names are too large for speech. They are simply recognized, like the first breath after drowning. Kor'Tal's knees folded. He did not fall. He knelt slowly, reverently, the way a man lowers himself into cold water he knows will remake him. The grass was soft, fragrant, alive. It pressed against his palms like it had been waiting centuries for this exact wait. The man walked forward, bare feet on dew. He stopped an arm's length away and crouched so their eyes were level. Up close, the scars were worse. And better. Old nail holes clean through both wrists, a jagged line across the brow where thorns had once been pressed. But the eyes, brown, warm, ancient with sorrow and young with laughter, held no accusation, only recognition. "You came a long way to get here, Kor'Tal," he said. The voice was quiet, ordinary, the kind of voice that could calm a storm or start one. It carried every accent humanity had ever spoken, braided into one. Kor'Tal tried to answer. His throat closed. All the apologies he had rehearsed in the dark on the way up the hill turned to ash. The man smiled, small and crooked, the smile of someone who had been betrayed by friends and still chose to break bread with them. "I'm not here to judge you," he said. "That was finished a long time ago." He reached out and touched the brand on Kor'Tal's palm. HFY, thumb tracing the letters like a blind man reading love in Braille. The glow flared, then settled into steady warmth. "Humanity, fuck yeah," he read aloud, amusement soft. "They always did have a way with words." A laugh escaped Kor'Tal, shocked, wet, helpless. The man laughed with him, and the sound rolled down the hill like dawn itself. Elena knelt beside them. She had tears on her cheeks, but her smile was fierce. "He asked me to bring you," she said to Kor'Tal. "Said you need to hear it from the source before you go back and try to unmake 30 years of damage." Kor'Tal looked at the man, really looked. Every doctrine he had ever dismissed, every prayer he had catalogued as adaptive fiction, every crucifixion he had reduced to socio-political theater, it all knelt here in the grass with him, naked and trembling. "I denied you," Kor'Tal whispered. "I denied all of them. I built a universe that had no room for you." The man's eyes softened further. "And yet here you are." He placed his scarred hand over Kor'Tal's heart. The touch burned not pain, but cleansing, the way fire burns dead wood so living things can grow. "I never needed your belief," he said. "I needed your attention. There's a difference." Kor'Tal's breath hitched. Images flashed behind his eyes, not memories, but possibilities. Concordance fleets turning back from hidden human colonies. Children on Veraprime learning Earth lullabies. Ministry halls filled with the sound of human names spoken aloud for the first time in centuries. All of it balanced on the next choice he made. "I'm afraid," Kor'Tal said. The confession came out small, honest. "If I go back and speak the truth, they'll strip me of everything. Rank, reputation, maybe my life." The man nodded. "They stripped me of more." He stood, offering his hand. Kor'Tal took it. The grip was calloused, strong, warm with carpenter's strength. "But fear isn't the opposite of courage," the man continued. "Silence is." He pulled Kor'Tal to his feet. The apple tree behind him rustled though there was no wind, and fruit fell, 3 apples, perfect, glowing faintly. One rolled to Kor'Tal's feet. "Take it," the man said. "When the time comes, bite, you'll know when." Kor'Tal picked it up. It was heavier than it should have been, dense with starlight. Elena rose too. Her face was luminous with something that looked like pride. The man looked past them, down the hill. The city was stirring, people moving toward the courtyard again, but this time carrying chairs outward, toward the desert, toward the place where the monoliths ended and the rest of the galaxy began. "It's time," he said. "They've waited long enough." Kor'Tal's hearts hammered. "What happens now?" The man smiled, and the dawn itself seemed to answer. "Now," he said, "you go tell my kids I never left them. And you bring some of them home." He embraced Kor'Tal, brief, fierce, the embrace of an older brother who had walked through hell and come back laughing. Then he stepped back. The hill began to dissolve, grass turning to sand, apple tree folding into light. Kor'Tal felt himself falling upward, the way one falls into waking. The last thing he heard was the man's voice, gentle, final, joyful. "Tell them the tomb is still empty, always was." Then the desert night slammed back into place. Kor'Tal stood at the edge of the waiting place circle again. The marble basin was gone. In its place lay the apple, real and solid, resting on bare sand. Laravel stood beside him, eyes wide, lips parted. She had seen it too. Behind them, the city was no longer hidden. It stretched across the desert now, visible to any eye, lanterns glowing, people walking outward in steady streams, carrying nothing but themselves. Above, the Concordance gunship still hovered, frozen, weapons cold. Their searchlights flickered and died one by one. Kor'Tal looked at the apple in his hand, then at the multitude walking toward the edge of the memorial, toward the living galaxy that had forgotten them. Laravel whispered, voice trembling with awe, "Doctor, they're leaving." Kor'Tal closed his fist around the apple. It pulsed once like a second heart. "No," he said. His voice carried farther than physics allowed. "They're going home." He took the first step toward the shuttle, not to flee, but to open the door. Behind him, millions of barefoot feet began to walk across the sand that had kept them buried for 300 years. They did not hurry. They had forever, and they had just been told the door was finally open. Kor'Tal felt the brand on his palm flare again, brighter than any searchlight. He raised it high. And across the desert, every monolith answered with light, billions of names blazing like sunrise on water. The first human stepped past him, an old woman in a nurse's scrubs, eyes bright with tears and laughter. She touched his cheek gently. "Thank you for remembering," she said. Then she kept walking, toward the stars that had waited long enough. Kor'Tal watched her go. Then he turned to the gunships, to the galaxy beyond, to the silence he was about to shatter forever. He smiled, small, fierce, terrified, free. And somewhere in the dark between worlds, a tomb that had never been full began to sing. They claimed humans had no soul. Until the dead started speaking to them, the desert had become a river, not of water, of people. They poured out from between the monoliths in a slow, unstoppable current, barefoot, laughing, weeping, singing in 1,000 languages that braided together into one wordless hymn. Children rode on shoulders. Old men leaned on young women who had died centuries before they were born. Every face carried the same expression, the stunned, fierce joy of prisoners who discover the cell door was never locked. Kor'Tal stood at the edge of the tide and let it part around him. No one pushed, no one hurried. They simply flowed, and where they passed, the red sand turned green with sudden grass, as though the planet itself exhaled after centuries of holding its breath. Laravel clung to his arm, not from fear now, but from wonder so sharp it felt like pain. Her violet eyes reflected the lanterns that moved with the people, lanterns that needed no fuel, only memory. The gunships above had gone silent. Their running lights blinked in confused patterns, like machines trying to process a command that had no protocol. One by one, their engines cut out. They hung in the sky a moment longer, then drifted downward, gentle as falling leaves, settling onto the newborn grass without crushing a single blade. Hatches opened. Pilots and gunners stepped out. Varen, Kalari, Thren, species Kor'Tal had dined with, lectured, dismissed. They stood in the open air and stared at the river of humanity with the stunned expressions of people who had come to burn a graveyard and found a wedding instead. A little girl, barefoot, maybe 6, hair in uneven braids, walked straight up to the nearest pilot, a stern Kalari female whose armor still smoked from weapon discharge. The child offered a daisy that had not existed 5 seconds earlier. The pilot took it with trembling claws. The flower did not wilt. Kor'Tal felt the apple throb in his pocket like a second heart. He drew it out. It had grown warm, almost hot. Red gold light leaked between his fingers. Alina appeared at his side, no longer translucent, solid enough to cast a shadow in the lantern glow. She wore the same faded hoodie, but now it was clean, as though freshly laundered by hands that loved her. "They're ready," she said quietly. "All of them." Kor'Tal looked past her. The river of people had reached the edge of the memorial, where the monoliths ended and the raw desert began again. There they stopped, not from hesitation, but from courtesy. They waited. For him. He understood suddenly. They would not cross that final line until the living gave permission, until someone who still had a pulse said yes. Kor'Tal's knees wanted to buckle again. The weight of it, billions of futures balanced on one alien tongue, was too much. Laravel stepped forward first. She walked 10 paces into the open desert, turned and faced the multitude. Then deliberately she knelt, not in submission, but in reverence, and pressed both palms to the sand. The grass raced outward from her touch, rolling like green fire across the dunes. In seconds the desert was gone. A meadow stretched to the horizon, dotted with wildflowers that sang when the wind touched them. Laravel looked up, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her face. "Come home," she said. Her voice carried on no wind and was heard by every soul present. "Please, come home." The dam broke. The river surged forward, not running, walking, dancing, skipping. They crossed the line where stone ended and grass began, and as they did, something extraordinary happened. They became visible to every sensor, every satellite, every telescope the Concordance had ever aimed at this forgotten world. At 04:17 Elysium Standard Time, the memorial planet lit up like a second sun. Across 1,000 systems, traffic control officers spilled coffee. Admirals woke from sleep with the taste of awe in their mouths. Children on colony worlds looked up and saw, for the first time in their lives, what hope looks like when it decides to stand up and walk. Kor'Tal felt the moment the galaxy noticed. A pressure wave of attention rolled over the planet, curiosity, fear, wonder, rage. The ministry would be scrambling now. Fleets would be spinning up. Quarantine declarations were probably already drafted. He looked at the apple. It pulsed once, urgent, ready. Alina touched his wrist. "Your move, doctor." Kor'Tal stepped forward until he stood at the exact border where stone met grass. He raised the apple high. Every human eye turned to him. Every alien eye on every descending gunship did the same. He spoke not loudly, but the planet itself amplified his voice until it rolled across continents of memory. "My name is Dr. Kor'Tal of Vera Prime. For 30 years, I served as chief xenospiritual analyst for the Galactic Concordance. I authored the report that declared humanity metaphysically null. I was wrong." He let that hang in the air a moment. "I was catastrophically, monstrously wrong, and I will spend whatever life I have left making amends." He looked at the pilots staring from their open hatches. Stand down, open your channels, broadcast everything you see. Let the galaxy watch what happens when love refuses to stay dead. Then he bit the apple. Light exploded from his mouth, not metaphor, literal white gold radiance that poured out of him like breath. It rolled across the meadow, touched every waiting soul, and where it touched, bodies that had been memory became flesh again. Not resurrection as myth, resurrection as fact. Skin, breath, heartbeat, warmth. Children gasped their first new lungful of air in centuries and laughed at how good it felt. Old men flexed fingers that had forgotten gravity and wept. The light kept going. It leapt from the planet into the sky, rode every open channel, every sensor feed, every frightened admiral's view screen. Across the Concordance, people really saw what they had spent 3 centuries pretending was impossible. Kor'Tal dropped to his knees in the grass, empty-handed, radiant. The apple was gone, but its taste, sweet, sharp, alive, lingered on his tongue like forgiveness. Elena knelt in front of him. Her new body was warm, solid, trembling with life. She cupped his face in hands that had once been only light. "Thank you," she whispered, and kissed his forehead. Sister, mother, soldier, priest. Behind her, the meadow had become a celebration. People embraced strangers who were no longer strangers. Someone started singing an old Irish tune. Within seconds, half the planet was harmonizing. A Kilari pilot was on his knees, claws buried in grass, sobbing like a child. Kor'Tal looked up. The sky above was no longer empty. Ships were arriving, not warships now, but civilian vessels, news cruisers, refugee arcs, even an old human ark that had hidden for generations, and finally heard the door open. They came without formation, without orders, drawn by a signal older than government. L'Oreal stood beside him, hair whipping in the wind of 10,000 landing thrusters. She was laughing and crying at once. "Doctor," she shouted over the roar. "Look," he followed her pointing finger. On the horizon, the monoliths were changing. Names were vanishing from the stone, not erased, released. Letter by letter, the memorials emptied as their owners stepped back into the world. When the last name faded, the stones themselves crumbled into silver dust that the wind carried upward, where it became new stars. Kor'Tal felt something vast and quiet settle over the planet, not an ending, a beginning. Elena helped him stand. Her grip was strong now, undeniably alive. "They'll want answers," she said. "The ministry, the fleets, everyone." Kor'Tal nodded. He was exhausted, exhilarated, terrified, certain. "Let them come," he said. "I have a story to tell." Far above, the first news drone caught a perfect image. An alien in a torn silver coat standing between a human woman and a meadow full of the impossible, raising his branded hand in greeting to a galaxy that had just discovered it was not alone after all. The feed went viral in 11 seconds. Across 1,000 worlds, people who had never known the taste of hope felt it bloom on their tongues like apple. And somewhere beyond the edge of sight, a carpenter with scarred hands smiled, closed a book that had never been empty, and walked on. They claimed humans had no soul. Until the dead started speaking to them, the meadow had no edge anymore. Grass rolled outward until it met the sky, and the sky itself had begun to sing in low planetary chords that vibrated in the bones. Ships kept coming, first dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. They landed wherever there was room, and there was always room. The planet adjusted the way a mother shifts to make space for one more child. Kor'Tal stood on a small rise that had not existed an hour ago. Around him, the newly breathed swarmed in joyful chaos. A teenage boy teaching a Varan pilot how to whistle, an old woman braiding flowers into a Thren warrior's sensory fronds, a circle of children from every century playing duck, duck, goose, with a stunned Concordance marine who kept forgetting whose turn it was because he could not stop crying. Elena had not left his side since the apple. Her pulse beat strong against his arm where she held it, proof, evidence, miracle. L'Oreal stood on his other side, barefoot now, field coat discarded, hair wild with wind and wonder. She looked like someone who had just discovered color existed. Above them, the largest ship yet descended, a Concordance dreadnought, the silent verdict, flagship of the Ministry of Spiritual Compliance. Its shadow swept across the meadow like an eclipse. Every weapon port was open. Every capacitor glowed cold blue. The singing faltered. A hush rippled outward until only the wind and the low thrum of engines remained. Kor'Tal felt the old fear try to crawl back into his throat. He swallowed it. It tasted like ash and old lies. Elena squeezed his arm. "They sent the one ship guaranteed to make us flinch," she murmured. "Clever." Kor'Tal looked at the dreadnought's name painted in letters 10 meters tall and laughed, a short, sharp bark that carried farther than it should have. "They sent the ship I helped design," he called up to it. "I know every blind spot." A child near the front, Timmy Brennan, red hair, gap-toothed grin, cupped hands around his mouth. "Hey, big scary boat, you're late to the party, we already got cake." Laughter rippled through the crowd, nervous at first, then genuine. The dreadnought's weapons did not fire. A single shuttle detached from the flagship and descended alone. It landed in a perfect circle of empty grass. The crowd left for it, as though the meadow itself had been expecting company. The ramp lowered. High Minister Valsar stepped out. Kor'Tal's direct superior for 28 years, the architect of the Accord of Silence, the one who had personally countersigned every null soul declaration. He was smaller than Kor'Tal remembered, older. His cranial tendrils had gone silver at the tips. He wore the black and silver robe of ultimate authority, but his hands trembled at his sides. Behind him came 6 enforcers in mirrored armor, weapons hot. They fanned out in perfect formation. Velsar's gaze swept the meadow, taking in the impossible, billions of living, breathing humans where there should have been only stone and silence. His eyes found Kor'Tal. "Doctor," he said, voice amplified through the robe's collar. "Step away from the anomalies. That is an order." Kor'Tal did not move. Lena leaned close and whispered, "He's terrified. Look at his tendrils." They were curled so tight they had knotted. Kor'Tal took one deliberate step forward. The crowd parted for him like water. He stopped 10 meters from the High Minister. "Minister," he said, calm, almost gentle, "you taught me that fear is the appropriate response to the unknown. Look around, be afraid." Velsar's throat worked. "This is mass hallucination, psi-contamination. You have been compromised." Kor'Tal lifted his branded hand. The letters HFY caught the dreadnoughts running lights and blazed. "Compromised," he repeated. "No, Minister, I have been corrected." He turned to the crowd, raised his voice so the shuttles, the drones, the billions watching on every channel would hear. 311 years ago, this ministry declared humanity extinct and soulless. I was the final signature on that declaration. Today I withdraw it. Today I testify before every star that can still see that humanity never died. They waited, and waiting is not the same as absence. A low rumble passed through the meadow, approval, thunder, amen. Velsar took one involuntary step back. His enforcers raised weapons. Elena stepped forward beside Kor'Tal. Her new body cast a real shadow now. She spoke not loudly, but every microphone caught it crystal clear. "You can shoot us again," she said. "We've done that part already. Turns out dying is temporary when love is permanent." One of the enforcers, a young Varen barely out of academy, lowered his rifle. Then another. The circle broke. Velsar's voice cracked. "Kor'Tal, you will come with me now, or I will have you taken." Kor'Tal smiled, small, tired, unbreakable. "You taught me something else, Minister. You said the ministry's authority rests on the certainty that nothing comes after death. Watch." He turned his back on the High Minister, deliberately, fearlessly, and walked into the crowd. Hands reached for him, human hands, warm, alive. They lifted him the way crowds once lifted heroes, passed him forward until he stood on the shoulders of strangers who had become family. From that height he looked across the meadow and raised both arms. And the dead know, the remembered, the returned began to sing the song they had carried through 3 centuries of silence. Not a battle hymn, a lullaby. An old one, something about a river and going home. The dreadnought's weapons powered down with a sound like a giant sigh. Velsar stood alone in the circle of grass as his enforcers dropped their rifles and walked forward, drawn by a music older than duty. He watched them go, watched the meadow swallow them with gentle hands. Then slowly he knelt, not in surrender, in recognition. His silver-tipped tendrils uncurled and lay against his skull like a penitent's hood. Kor'Tal was lowered gently back to the ground. Elena and Luravel flanked him again. A little girl, the same one with the daisy, ran up and placed a crown of woven grass on Velsar's head. He did not stop her. The High Minister looked up at Kor'Tal with eyes that had seen the end of every certainty he had ever owned. "What happens now?" he asked, voice small. Kor'Tal crouched so they were eye to eye. "Now," he said, "you decide whether the Concordance will be the first government in history to apologize while there is still someone left alive to hear it." He offered his hand. Velsar stared at it for a long moment. Then slowly he took it. The meadow erupted in cheers that shook the stars. Above them, the silent verdict opened every hangar door, not to fire, to let light in. And somewhere in the distance, a carpenter with scarred hands picked up his traveling cloak, slung it over his shoulder, and started walking toward the next world that had forgotten how to hope. They claimed humans had no soul. Until the dead started speaking to them, the apology came 47 days later. Not in a sterile chamber on Vera Prime, but on the meadow itself, beneath a sky that had learned how to hold 2 suns, one real, one made of memory. High Minister Velsar stood barefoot in the grass, robe discarded, wearing only a simple gray tunic. His cranial tendrils were unbound and silver in the light. Behind him, ranked in perfect silence, stood every surviving member of the Ministry of Spiritual Compliance. They had come unarmed. They had come, most of them, weeping before they ever left orbit. Before them, humanity. Not billions now, many had already scattered to hidden colonies, to new worlds, to old Earth where the radiation had finally cooled enough for apple trees. But enough, 100 million at least, standing shoulder to shoulder in a living mosaic of every century, every skin, every language ever spoken under one small star. Kor'Tal stood at the front, between Elena and Luravel. The brand on his palm had faded to a faint gold scar shaped like 4 letters no one needed to read aloud anymore. Timmy Brennan sat on his shoulders, legs swinging, eating an apple with deliberate noisiness. Michael leaned against a nearby tree that had not existed a month ago, arms folded, watching with quiet pride. Valesar's voice carried without amplification. The planet itself made sure every soul heard. On behalf of the Galactic Concordance, he began, and his voice cracked on the second word. He stopped, swallowed, began again, softer, rower. On behalf of every world that turned away, on behalf of every fleet that fired, on behalf of every report that called you myth, every child taught you were less than nothing, I am sorry. Silence, not angry, not forgiving yet, just listening. Valesar sank to his knees. The entire ministry followed, a black and silver wave folding into green. We do not ask forgiveness, he said. We have no right, we only ask to be allowed to remember with you. A wind moved across the meadow, carrying the scent of bread baking somewhere, of rain coming, of oceans that had not forgotten how to sing. Elena stepped forward. She wore a simple white dress now, hair loose, gray streak catching the light like moonlight on water. She stopped in front of Valesar and offered her hand. He looked at it as though it might burn him, then took it. She pulled him to his feet. Memory isn't a debt, she said gently. It's a door, you just walked through it. She turned to the crowd, raised her voice so the drones, the stars, the future itself would never forget. They are sorry, we are here, let the next chapter begin. And humanity, stubborn, relentless, impossible humanity, did the thing no simulation had ever predicted. They forgave, not all at once, not cleanly. There were tears, there were arguments that lasted weeks. There were nights when old grief rose like a tide and had to be held by strangers who understood drowning. But they forgave, because that is what humans do when love finally gets a vote. Years later, decades, centuries, travelers would come to Elysium Necropolis and find no monoliths, no graves, only meadow rolling to every horizon. In the center stood one tree, an apple tree, ancient now, heavy with fruit. Beneath it, a simple wooden bench. On the bench, a small plaque in 100 languages. They said we had no soul. We waited until they were ready to listen. Sit, eat, remember with us. And if you sit long enough, on certain quiet evenings when the two suns touch, you might see an alien with silver-tipped tendrils and a human woman with a gray streak in her hair walking together, hand in hand, arguing amiably about whose turn it is to water the tree. Nearby, a red-haired boy who never quite grew up will be teaching a group of wide-eyed children from a dozen species how to whistle with a blade of grass. And if you're very still, you might hear footsteps approaching bare, unhurried, and feel, without looking, that someone infinitely gentle has paused behind you, resting scarred hands on the back of the bench. He will not speak. He never needs to. The tree is proof enough. The fruit is sweet. The door stays open. And somewhere always, a stubborn species that once refused to die keeps proving that love is stronger than entropy, stronger than silence, stronger than every verdict ever written in the cold language of fear. They claimed humans had no soul. The dead disagreed. And the living, finally, thankfully, joyfully learned how to listen.